One of the biggest discussion pieces every draft season is ceiling versus floor. Who would you rather have, a high ceiling or a high floor guy? We're going to discuss this and more coming up next.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Locked On family? Welcome back to the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, your daily podcast covering your favorite draft prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen today and every single day, and thank you for being our every single dayers. I'm your boy, Damian Parson, always on the ones and twos. You can find and follow me on X at DP_NFL. I'm a national scout and a senior draft analyst. And as always, guys, on this bonus episode for this beautiful Monday, as always, I got to kick the intro over to my guy, Mr. LSU, Keith Sanchez. You can find and follow him on X at TheTalentCode. Keep talking to him, baby.
What's up, Locked On family? This is Keith Sanchez, 2019 national champ with those LSU Bengal Tigers, man. Here to bring you championship level content surrounding the NFL draft 24/7, 365. The other part to this dynamic duo that we call the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, man. Well, listen, man, I always say this, man. We talk draft strategy. We talk draft philosophies, man, over here. But guess what, DP? We getting into the draft strategy, draft philosophy for this bonus episode, man. We had a conversation and we said, you know what, scratch that. Let's have this conversation on air, man, for our everydayers. And we're talking ceiling versus floor, right? Floor, however you identify a floor versus drafting that guy with the high ceiling. What do you want for your price? For your franchise, right? When you're talking about the quarterback position, running back, wide receiver, edge rushers, we're about to have a really, really good conversation, man. This is strictly philosophies, right? This ain't no mock drafts. This is not no draft evaluations. This is strictly philosophy and how do you go about it, man? And we're going to break this down for you guys, man. So ready to get this thing started. But DP, before we get started, man, why don't you hit them with our title sponsor?
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. Guys, ceiling versus floor is you hear it every single draft season. Well, I like this guy. He has a higher ceiling, but this guy has the higher floor. And it's all about how do we value them. And Keith, for you, you worked in coaching. You know what I mean? You were at LSU. You did recruiting, all those things. You saw those guys that had the high ceilings where you're like, man, if this kid hits, oh, he's an elite player. But then you also had those guys that came in more polished, more technically refined. He's ready to go right now but the ceiling, because his physical tools may not be as high. So Keith, when we talk about ceiling versus floor, how do you value them in your personal scouting process?
Yeah, and I'm glad we're about to have this conversation. I think it's going to be fun, right? I like it happening at the beginning of the draft season, right? So we can start to kind of unfold this thing. I'm more of a high floor type of guy. And when I say high floor, I'm going to say high floor in the sense of the fact of I have to have seen you done it already, right? I don't want to leave that part up to I guess up to thought, right? If you can potentially do it at this level, like I want to see you. I'm a prove it guy, right? Like, hey, you've proven it to me that you're worthy of this selection, and you say, okay, Keith, how does that go versus, I guess per round and my draft selection? And I'm looking at it from this perspective, DP, is that you take just the quarterbacks, right? Just the quarterbacks in the past, who've been productive, and those who haven't been productive, right? And we can look at the Trey Lances, right? The potentially the Zach Wilsons, even though he had one good year, and then I could keep going into different quarterbacks, right? The Mitchell Trubiskys, right? And all those quarterbacks are quarterbacks that we haven't necessarily seen them do it at a high level, right? And what we bet on was the high ceiling, right? But when you understand something is that the ceiling is at the very top, right? But in any room, the ceiling and the floor, there's a lot of stuff in between there, right? And that's my thing, is that when you do that, right, you understand what a floor is, and you looking at the ceiling, but understand that there's a lot of stuff in between the ceiling and the floor. And oftentimes, DP, that's where these prospects, in my opinion, fall at, right? Some of them fall flat to the floor, and then some of them fall closer to the floor. But how many times do we see the high ceiling players that we haven't seen do it right really touch the ceiling. And that's kind of why, especially with the quarterback position.
No, I Keith, and that's a good point because, like you said, like there's a lot of space between the ceiling and the floor. And I even go back to 2023 NFL draft. I remember we were over at the Draft Network. We have our scouting meetings. You're like, man, with the first overall pick, you just like for a team that struggled to find quarterbacks, like you're talking about the Carolina Panthers at the time, right? It was like Bryce Young. Like just you just want somebody that can start and be a long-term starter at this point. Like, you know what I mean? Because you struggle for so long, right? And it's like I would never forget going back to I can't remember which draft it was. 2018, I think the one in Dallas where Baker Mayfield went 1, Sam Darnold went like 3 or 5 or whatever it was, and then you had what was it? Josh Rosen, Josh Allen, and then Lamar Jackson at the back end, right? And then the crazy thing about it was those first 3 quarterbacks off the board, or so like that inside that first 4, the Josh Rosen, the Baker Mayfield, and the Sam Darnold, those were quote unquote the kind of high floor guys that the NFL was like, well, I know what I'm getting with those guys. I remember listening and hearing about a story about a former Brown scout like talking about, well, the reason why we didn't go with Josh Allen because he didn't throw enough in college. Like we saw enough of Baker Mayfield to where we've been through that QB carousel, that QB turmoil. He was like, man, we got to find a starter, man. Like we don't want to play the high variance game again. And I understood, and I think that's a part of it too, right? Keith is like, depending on where your franchise has been, especially when you're looking at quarterbacks, if you're a franchise that has hit, like if you're the Green Bay Packers, if the Packers selected, like if Jordan Love was not there and they selected and they moved up in the top 5 and selected a high like ceiling quarterback, I'm gonna trust that situation because they've hit, Keith. You know what I'm saying? They've hit on those high ceiling the Brett Favre, the Aaron Rodgers, right? Even right now, we see it with Jordan Love. Same thing. They're hitting on those quarterbacks. But if you're a team like the Chicago Bears, dear God, like you have not hit. You know what I mean? The Carolina Panthers, the jury's still out on Bryce, but you haven't hit outside of Cam, right? You had Jake Delhomme. You had Jimmy Clausen at one point. Like, what are we doing? You know what I mean? Like, you just it's we've seen it. So I think that's a very big part of this discussion is like, where have you been as a franchise until on the quarterbacks? For me, it was always like, because we always talk about it, right? Trucks and trailers. I always want a truck because it's like, man, for a trailer or maybe even a hitch, it takes a lot to get you to be where you need to be your best, right? If the Miami Dolphins don't go get Tyreek Hill and it's just Jalen Waddle and a cast of misfits of just like average players, Tua is probably never discussed as an MVP candidate this year. Brock Purdy is not in San Fran. If he's in Houston, we see what CJ Stroud's doing. I don't care. You put Brock Purdy there, they're not in the playoffs. I don't believe that. You know what I mean? Like, because the talent, it gets to a point of, for me, Keith, it's like, all right, and even like, and I'll get your opinion on this as a coach. Defensively, I want to, because I'm an offensive minded guy. I want my offense to be in a place where you have to gear up to take my quarterback out the game first. You know what I mean? Where we've seen with Lamar Jackson makes Zay Flowers' life easy, Rashad Bateman's life easy, Pat Mahomes, even though his receivers aren't doing him any favors, he makes their job easier because defenses coordinators still walk in the rooms like, listen, number 15. That's the first thing. We got to chop the head off the snake here. We got to stop him first, whether it's his playmaking ability, pressuring him, whatever it is, right? So from a defensive standpoint, that's kind of offensive standpoint. That's how I always want my offense to be built around, like a truck quarterback that will force defenses to key on him first, to where then now my scheme and everything else can free up my playmakers.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And let's do this, DP. I know we have to transition, but what I don't want to do is I don't want to transition away from this conversation because we about to unload, right? We about to talk about this. We got to get down to some examples. We about to talk quarterback. We about to talk about edge rusher, running backs, wide receiver, all of those conversations. So coming up next, man, stay tuned because we just gonna keep this conversation going, right? Simply put, man, ceiling versus floor. How do you view those prospects? And if you're watching on YouTube, right, man, go ahead and comment. Tell us how you feel about it, man. But coming up next, man, we're gonna keep this conversation going, ceiling versus floor.
At the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What's the one move I can make that'll take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board, guys. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. It is also why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Coach K, we keeping this conversation rolling, man. So again, with ceiling full, we talk about from a quarterback standpoint, right? But even you remember the rumors last draft where it was, well, the Houston Texans at number 3, or with their second first round pick in the top 10 or wherever it was, they could select, decide to go the route of Tyree Wilson, right? The defensive lineman from Texas Tech, who's now with the Las Vegas Raiders. Go Tyree Wilson over Will Anderson. And when we heard, I remember both of our reaction when we heard that, it was like, you got to be kidding me. And even though I'm a high ceiling guy, it's more so it varies from position to position, right? Because for me, I never looked at Will Anderson as a low ceiling guy. I looked at him as a high floor, high ceiling guy.
Right. And no, I'm right there with you. And I think what happens is that people get enamored with the unseen, right? Like it's that thing of where I just want a little bit, like I just want to know the unseen thing. Like, and that's what people go. That's why you see these prospects, right, that have done it. And sometimes it gets boring and monotonous, right? Just saying Will Anderson is the best edge rusher out there, right? It just gets a little bit monotonous. And sometimes people, it's like going into a casino. They want to take a little risk, right? Like you can tell them, listen, you can keep this money in your pocket and what you've won, right? Some people don't want to leave the casino. It's like, if I made 1,000, I want to try to make 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, right? Instead of just taking, listen, you know what you have in your pocket. And it's the battle, DP, against almost human nature for some people. And that's why I hate to throw blanket statements on, like even with the quarterback situation, like, oh, I only want a quarterback that has this many reps, stuff like that, right? I like to allow the film to speak to me, right? When I evaluate prospects and give them draft grades. But on the flip side of that is that the one thing that I do have as far as with players is putting the film first, right? Like that's my if you tell me what's my go-to or what do I lean on, or like what is my statement, right? It's put the film first, man. And if you're watching the film and you sit there, and I'll tell you at LSU, right? You want to talk about some of the biggest misses? Well, those projection type guys, because y'all sit that, like if we have a defensive end, right? That's 6'5" or 6'4", 215 pounds, right? And he runs he runs the 200 and the 400, right? And he's a really good athlete at the 200 and the 400. And what happens is this is like, oh man, what if we just put some weight on him? And in the film, I'm gonna sum this up too. The film was very average, right? It's very average film. There's nothing spectacular. You're talking about in high school, might have had 4 sacks, right? But he's 6'4", 6'5", 210 pounds, runs the 200 and the 400, one district or something like that, right? So good athlete, right? And what you do is you spend your time and you say, man, a young kid out of Alabama who's 6'4", 6'5", that was a track athlete. You know who he could be? DeMarcus Ware, right? You say that. You say, like, he could be DeMarcus Ware. And then, but you forget that for every DeMarcus Ware, there's 1,000 John Smiths. Nobody knows John Smith. You want to know why? Because John Smith didn't pan out, right? Like that's not a Hall of Fame edge rusher. So even in my time at LSU, DP, I've seen that that's where you get in the most trouble, right? Is when you're trying to mold something into what it hasn't been. And especially if the film is out there, man, you rely on the film, right? Because when a guy puts on a helmet, shoulder pads, puts his cleats on, that football player, that usually translates, right? When we watch Will Anderson and what he's doing on the football field, some of the same stuff he was doing at Alabama. And I'll tell you this, it's some of the same stuff he was doing at Dutchtown High School when he was playing in Georgia, right? He's always had that mentality and that temperament to him. So I understand that, but that's addressing some of the edge rush. I want to go back to the quarterback conversation, though, DP, real quick, because you did talk about you betting on the ceiling. Or you know what I'm saying? Or like, you know, like Anthony Richardson, right? Like you like Anthony Richardson because of the tools, right? And then it does show opposite for me in that draft that you brought up, the 2018 draft, right? Me taking, I guess I would have been one of those guys that have took Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, or Josh Rosen, right? Because those are the proven guys. And then you had Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, who are the two of the top quarterbacks. So that philosophy may not have applied in the 2018 draft, right? But I want to act like, what's your reasoning for that, right? Like, what's the opposite perspective of that? What's your reasoning? And I know you talked about the truck stuff, but if you're put in position to play general manager, are you a go big or go home type guy? If you're like, you know what, if I'm gonna get fired, I'm gonna get fired on this. You know what I'm saying? Because you like, if I'm gonna lose my job, I'm gonna lose my job on this guy. Like, what's your philosophy when approaching that? And does that make you nervous not having seen him do it, right? Because we've seen so many 6'5" quarterbacks like a Logan Thomas, right? Remember, came out of Virginia Tech. It's been a lot of quarterbacks, right? Like they just had physical tools and haven't done it. So I want to ask you, like, where do you find the calmness, right, in making a selection like that if you're the general manager?
So first thing, Keith, I am that kind of GM where it's like, listen, I'm not getting fired because I drafted Mac Jones top 15. That's not about to happen to me. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm not taking a guy that has like very average to poor physical traits, but you know, I mean, as my scouts are telling me, man, but because that's all I remember. All that talk about Mac Jones was he's, you know, and it's so crazy how the media spun it. Oh, he's got Tom Brady athleticism in the pocket. I've never heard that term as a scout. Like I've never heard somebody say, man, I love that Tom Brady athleticism. Like nobody's ever said that in a positive way. It was always used a negative way against TB12, right? Because he wasn't the most athletic. So it was a lot of different. It was a great spin job by the media when it came down to Mac Jones. For me, it's more so like, all right, how do I find solace into? Because I'm also a guy that I will meet you halfway. Where I want my tools, Keith, but I do also like think about the floor. And for me, like for example, like Anthony Richardson, right? When I watched Anthony Richardson, remember we talked about this. I watched Anthony Richardson and I was like, okay, I need to see where your tools, can you take over games, right? That's why I was so cool with Lamar Jackson, because I saw him take over games in college. And I'm like, all right, what are some things the things he needs to work on was more mechanical. He has a narrow base. His feet were too close apart. He was kind of heel clicky. Those type of things are muscle memory things that you get with a good QB coach and you work through. So it's like, hey, no, we don't need to like Josh Allen. What was his biggest thing? And I wish I could find the interview he did where he talked about revamping his throwing motion. He was a push thrower where his shoulders, instead of being like this, were like this. So like when he threw, he was always cocked to one side and he was just a push thrower, overstriding with the lead foot. And he talked about like, man, no, I had to fix that because it messed up every bit of my process. I didn't have proper weight transfer, all that stuff. So for me, it's like when I see your tools take over games, that's when I find solace. So when I looked at Anthony Richardson, I'm like, yo, yeah, he's 20 years old, going to be 21 or whatever. And he's super talented. But then I watch him against Tennessee in a game where I need you to be one of the two top players on the field, and that's what he was, right? Against Hendon Hooker, offense in 2022 of that college football season, nobody could stop except for Georgia. You know what I mean? They found a way to stop him, but nobody really had an answer for him. They lit up Alabama. They lit up everybody. So in that game, and you watching Hendon Hooker just throw deep ball after deep ball, score after score, and it's like Anthony Richardson almost, remember that it was the game. It was like the Cam Newton Panthers versus the Giants. It was that kind of, I think it was the OBJ, Josh Norman fight in the middle of the game or whatever.
Yep.
I remember Eli Manning scoring late in that game, and Cam is on the sideline with his towel on his head. He watches him score. He's like, okay.
Oh yeah, it's a gift now. It's like one of those.
Yeah, it's a legit gift. So he's like, okay. And he takes, you know what I'm saying? And he goes up there and leads him down the field. And it was like, I saw that with Anthony Richardson, right? And then, you know, of course, like what we do is we crowdsource. We talk to people that know these young men. Is like, what is he like at practice? What is he like in the film room? And then hearing from his offensive line, like, man, we haven't seen what this young man, what he can be. So it's like, it's just, for me, it's like gathering all that information, putting it all together. Now, without as I talk about liking traits, what was one quarterback I didn't like that?
What?
Will Levis.
Okay, well, let's stop it right there because you took it where I was going to go with this. You took it exactly where I was going to go with this. So coming up next, man, DP walked right into my trap, right? And that's where I want to go. I want to stop with the Will Levis conversation. So coming up next, man, we about to go into the Will Levis conversation, right? We talked quarterbacks, we talked about ceilings. Let's talk about Will Levis and have this conversation, man, just as far as the ceiling versus floor when it comes to NFL draft prospects. Coming up next.
Just a couple weeks ago, we were wrapping up presents for Christmas. Now we have wrapped up the NFL regular season, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed when they place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed when they place a $5 bet. Again, $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is super easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same game parlays, finding bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and so much more. So, guys, all you need to do is visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make your first bet a layup. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel is the official partner of the NFL. Will Levis, Keith. Yeah, even though I like traits, I was not a fan of Will Levis. I liked his ceiling, and I knew that his ceiling was high. He's 6'4", 230, elite arm talent, mobile.
Tricks.
What I talked about,
DP, he got the ceiling.
He's got the ceiling, right? But he didn't have the games where he took over. Where I watched Anthony Richardson go for 500 total yards and 4 touchdowns versus Tennessee, in 2022, with a bad cast of characters in terms of around him at the wide receiver position and tight end position. He didn't have a lot of talent around him. And then I watched Will Levis throw for 98 yards and I think 4 interceptions against that exact same team. And it's like, where for me it was like, okay, one guy took the Superman traits or the superhuman traits, and I saw him be a superhero on the field, where the other guy is like, yeah, that's Superman. That's Clark Kent. That's how I felt about Will Levis. I didn't see enough Superman. I saw too much suit and tie. I saw too much Clark Kent when I watched this film, where it's just like, he's not, and even now in the NFL, yeah, he's chasing the deep ball, and if guys are open, he can fit it in there. He can fit in the tight windows. The arm talent, that didn't change. But what is he still doing? Stone-footed in the pocket. What is he still doing? Not moving and shuffling and finding throwing lanes and getting away from pressure. What is he still doing? Taking sacks that he shouldn't take. And he did that for 2 straight years at Kentucky. So for me, it's like, that's why I wasn't a fan of Will Levis, because as much as talented as he was, I always felt like something was holding him back mentally, where he doesn't use his athleticism like he should. He's not, you know what I mean? Like, if you're going to play man-to-man, that's a 4-5 athlete at quarterback, Keith. Typically, when you play man-to-man, a guy like that's going to force you to play 11 on 11. He doesn't do those things. And it's like, he didn't do it at Kentucky. He did it the first year under Liam Cohen. And then Rich Gangrello, his second year in Kentucky, I was told that they didn't want him running the football as much because he kept getting banged up, right? You know what I mean? He kept dealing with just different injuries, sprained finger, bad shoulder, a knee injury, an ankle, a toe. It was just like, what in the world is going on, man? You built like Superman, but you consistently getting hurt. So I understood not running them. So I think that's where everything came to fruition for me. It was just like, I like this. I still like his ceiling. But I need to see that growth, that, you know what I mean, that step up, like you know those charts, Keith, where it's like, yeah, you look at the numbers, like, okay, we're going up. I never saw that with Will, where I see like a little bit of growth, and then it was like, well, no, we're back down. And it was like, man, I don't want you to make a mountain, big dog. I need you to keep that thing going, make it a roller coaster ride. We're going to the top, baby. And I just never saw that with Will, and I still haven't seen it yet during his rookie year.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair explanation, right? And just having this conversation, especially without people listening, without everydayers, man. And I'll kind of jump into this is where I kind of fall with this, and I guess I'm kind of like this with almost every position, right? Is that I want to put it in position as a film evaluator, as an NFL film evaluator. I want to be able to cut the film back on. Like if a prospect misses, I want to be able to cut the film on, and then people say, like, you know what? That was a good football player, right? That's on him that he didn't work out, right? The worst thing is, and you had this happen before in a coach's room, right? Is that you go back and now a player's in year 3, year 4, and they're not a very good player, right? And when you do something called retroactive evals, you go back and watch the film, and then you watch him, like, they never were really good, right? That's an on you type of situation. You see what I'm saying? When I draft DP, I want to draft and put all the onus on the player in the sense of the fact that if you were a talented football player, that's on you that you didn't work out, right? Like, because the question is this: even you think of a guy like a Cleveland Farrell, right? Whose fault was that? That wasn't Cleveland Farrell's fault, right? He was what he was and told you what he was for 3 to 4 years at Clemson, right? That was on. I can't even remember who drafted him. I don't think that was that John Gruden and Mike Mayock.
John Gruden and Mike Mayock. Yep.
Yeah, that's on you, right? Like, you decided to ignore the film. So for me, man, I simply put it like this, man. The film, for me, the film is king, man. That's probably 70% of my evaluation, right? And then you get into the details of stuff and what a player could be. But man, let the player, let the film. They all play football. You're watching football film. Let that dictate the pace. Let that dictate who the prospect is when you're talking about ceiling versus floor conversations.
No, 100%, Keith. And I think even we'll get into, guys, we'll talk about the offensive tackles and stuff. This is a little offensive tackle group, right? But like even with the Olu Fashanu Joe Alt situation, you're gonna look at Olu. We know Olu Fashanu's ceiling is so high because of what? 6'5", 6'6". He's probably gonna have 35 inch arms. He's a freak athlete in terms of his ability to redirect, change directions, move, recover. Like he's an outrageous athlete at the tackle position, right? But he's still raw in terms of polish and refinement, technical prowess.
Process.
Where you look at a Joe Alt, he's more cleaner, right? He's got a high floor and he's still got a high ceiling too. But it's like, okay, that's where you're going to have those discussions. If you're a team like maybe the Tennessee, not even maybe, but the Tennessee Titans, depending on where you land, and you're the team to pick the first offensive tackle, they're going to have that discussion, right? Where it's like, man, do we go with the freak of nature, the freak athlete? Or do we say, you know what? No, man, let's go make sure we get us a proven day one starter. Like, even though a lot of us, I still think Olu's a day one starter, right? You got to let them get them reps in. But Joe Alt is going to be a cleaner prospect in a lot of people's eyes. So it's like, where do we go from here, right? And then you look at what we've seen with Ike Ekwonu, right? How his struggles. And it's like, high ceiling guy, big, strong, athletic, but he was a mess from a technical standpoint. And then now, in 2 years, he's still a mess from a technical stance prospect, process and everything and perspective, Keith. So it's like, it's just crazy, man. We've seen all these different edge. I remember Vernon Golston from Ohio State, years ago, like a decade or so ago, maybe more than a decade. Like, got to meet the height, weight, speed. He was a chiseled guy. He looked like an NFL edge rusher.
Yep,
but it was just all straight line speed. It was never pass rush plan. It was never change of direction. It was never bend and dip. It was just, man, he looks the part. And that's the thing. That's a big thing. And it's still, Keith, it rears its ugly head in the NFL today, where you still have people who will judge prospects more so off of the way they look, right? You know what I mean? A guy walks into the combine and he's got the shirt and the shorts on. You like, man, that's a football player, baby. That's a football player. But you see that guy? That's a football player. And you just completely forget that his tape is just as raw as all get out. You know what I mean? His tape is just as raw as a pack of chicken that's uncooked from the store. You like, you know what, man? I don't care. Like, did you see that guy? Let me get that guy on my roster. Let me take him top 10. And you take him top 10, and then in 2 years, the whole staff is fired because you never got him to be in where he needed to be.
Yep, I'm about to list off some names, DP. I'm gonna start with Chase Claypool, right? He fits that mold exactly. I remember sitting in Indianapolis, man, with a couple of scouts. I won't say from what team. We were sitting there and we talked about him, and I was like, yeah, I wouldn't take him in the 4th, 5th round. And I get it. He was 6'3", 6'4", explosive, like just look every bit of a wide receiver, right? But when you look at the details, the route running, the catching, right? Like all of that stuff, it was question marks. And I'm like, that's the most important part of playing wide receiver, right? But you totally skipped over that. And I'm like, just rely on the film. And then I'm gonna say this: Darius Hayward-Bay, right? Remember that guy. Henry Ruggs, right? Went wide receiver 1 in one of the best wide receiver drafts that we've had, right? And it's because you're trying to base this off of a ceiling or something that you haven't even seen, right? You just think that, hey, this guy's gonna insert here and do this. So DP, I think it was a fun conversation, man, being able to apply context. And like I said, I want to do more of these, right? Like I said, we talk draft strategy, we talk draft philosophies over here, man. And I think that's a dope draft philosophy to have and just a conversation to have, man. And listen, like I said, y'all comment. You're not subscribed to the channel. Tell us what y'all philosophy, right? What's some of y'all biggest hits? What's some of y'all biggest misses? And what were y'all approaches to finding those hits and misses, man? But listen, I am Keith Sanchez. You can find me on X at The Talent Code, man. The guy to my left, man, that is Damian Parson, man. You can find him on X at DP_NFL. And like we always like to say, man, y'all talk to us because we like to talk back.
Go subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Get the latest episode as soon as it is available. As I always tell you guys, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, go download, subscribe, like, share, leave a 5-star review, man. Continue to support this channel, to support this podcast and this channel on YouTube if you're more of a visual person. But for my audio listeners, definitely show us that love. Leave those 5-star reviews for your boys, man, for your favorite dynamic duo. But listen, guys, as we said, tomorrow, we are breaking down and recapping the national championship game. Whose stock is up? Whose stock is down? Does Michael Penix make himself QB3? We're going to talk about all of that on tomorrow's show. So come and join the conversation again tomorrow on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.